Good morning. This is Debra V. Wilson. It is Sunday. It's the 18th of November 2018, and the time is 600 hours and 19 minutes, and that's GMT, and I'm in West Yorkshire. So, I'm still in the testing mode of the, new, it's in quotes, is relatively speaking. I am just experimenting with some different ways of presenting on my podcast, and I'm still in that zone. So bear with me. In any case, I'm going to be taking notes as I'm talking because I want to be quite reserved in what I say. So, with that in mind, this very short podcast is about the some relational dynamics between women's feminist-based, feminist-centered civil society and the national security model here in the UK. So, and by national, I'm including special branch out of the Met, which is SO15, because they do have the model is specific to London, but also is quite expansive and has functionality across the country. So I'm thinking SO15 / special branch and MI5. So excuse me, I do apologize. I'm 61 years old. I started here in the UK, coming here to the UK, right before I turned 30. So, and I had a break of actually physically being here for a while, but I still remain connected through online research and offline research and friends here. So for approximately 30 years, I've had a connection to this country. Part of that connection included for a time being questioned, asked, and choosing to answer and participate. And when I entered the country, at Heathrow Terminal 4, then Terminal 5 by Special Branch, because I was going from meeting to meeting, what I think caused this, and they can speak for themselves, the state, but they won't, not about this. But anyway, I was going from meeting to meeting, taking notes, because I was trying to understand how feminism and activism in general performed here, and to understand the ways in which it performed and how that those performances impacted civil society, and in the cases where the civil society were questioning, challenging, analyzing, seeking to edit the national security model, what that activism did to the collective national security model. With that, again, so there came a time that Special Branch started, every time I came into the country, asking what was I doing, why was I going to organization A, B, C, D, the entire alphabet, okay? And what was I seeing, and they were asking me about my opinions of what I saw. So I should also add that I was always transparent with the organizations. I was not a paid employee or any kind of employee of the British government. I chose to do the activism. I chose to continually share my observations with the state, and I chose to tell activists that I came in contact with that this was happening. So, over the years, I've always been very connected to activism here in this country. There came a point that I became aware of activism that it actually didn't have a name. It was feminist, all under the umbrella of feminism, out of London, England, and they were feminists getting together, literally questioning the ways in which the state kept us safe. Again, Special Branch and MI5. They were doing analysis, any public information they could get a hold of, and also we're living the model, we experienced the model. People that had contact with the state, be it not necessarily a pleasant experience in many cases, wrote about that experience and what they thought it was in terms of functionality in keeping us safe. I became intrigued with his activism and became a willing part of it. So I was then in a situation where I was analyzing from a bottom-up perspective the national security modeling in the UK, and then also looking at civil society. It's very interesting for me. This relationship I had with Special Branch went on for quite some time. During that time, I continued to work with activists here, feminist activists that were sending in reports and writing and doing their analysis. And one heard this, that, and the other about relationships of engagement that other feminists were having with the state. That's their story to tell. But it led me to wonder and question why it was never publicly stated. Certainly not from the state's perspective. I think part of that is the state spying agencies, all spying agencies have a propensity to seek spaces of secrecy. I also think, I don't know, I felt, my opinion, I think there might have been some reticence to view what feminists were doing as necessarily friendly, or as to look at it as anything to do with national security modeling. I think my opinion is that sometimes I got the feeling, my opinion, that the state viewed it as we were in some ways in opposition. I don't know if I always felt that with Special Branch, but I think in the experiences that some other feminists had, I definitely got the impression that there was a sense of mistrust, maybe. And again, this is my opinion. Nevertheless, there was all this work that was going on for years where feminist activists were engaged in to co-opt Sarah Khan, the commissioner for the Commission of Countering Extremism, and I probably have that name wrong, but I'll post the link to that. These women we were engaged in counter-extremism activism of all kinds, extremism in its various manifestations in the UK. We were also doing edits of national security modeling, but it all was put under the umbrella of social cohesion, and there was also a lot of secrecy around it. So that this activism that had been going on for years that I stepped into, that existed here, that was specifically around looking at how the state and assessing how the state was keeping us safe, and then reaching out to the state and saying, we think you need to do a better job, and this is why. Really well thought out papers and research and activism. And I always looked at that secrecy that, in some parts, I have to be fair here. In some parts, I think that there would have been reticence by these feminist organizations to call what they were doing anything that what they were doing as national security work or counter-extremism work. And so I think that the way in which the activism was defined by civil society, feminist civil society, was interesting, and then that coupled with the state and the way in which they looked at having this working relationship that was never stated and was not ever clearly defined. The working relationship I had with Special Branch was never stated. It was never clearly defined. It was there, and everybody in my circle knew, and Special Branch knew that I knew. I knew that this, but it wasn't clearly defined as the work that we were doing, feminist. And I think that produced a bunch of interesting dynamics. One of the things, it's not a really clear picture. There's a muddled and not really well-defined picture, a historical picture of private citizens who worked in this country doing counter-extremism activism. I think because so much of it, particularly that out of the women's sector, be it feminist or not, was hidden either by the state or by the feminist, or both parties were in agreement. And it was hidden not for nefarious reasons. I think in many cases not for nefarious reasons, for safety reasons it was hidden, and you didn't want to be seen as it having any engagement with the state because of this whole binary that exists, the binaries that exist here. You're either left or right. And if you cross over and deal with the other, then you're tainted and your brand gets changed. And so I think there was some of that. I also think there was the way in which the feminist organizations viewed themselves, the women's organizations, viewed themselves and how they defined the work they were doing. And then I think from the state there was a fair bit of sexism. If you look at the work and read the work, it is clearly work, counter-extremism work, that some of the feminist organizations, women's organizations were engaged in. And it was also clearly national security modeling, the editing of national security modeling. It was hardly ever labeled that. So one of the things, again, like I said, that's happened as a result of this, there isn't really a clear understanding of history and who did what and when in this country in terms from a civilian perspective, bottom-up perspective, and helping to keep this nation safe. And then the next thing that happened is that because this was done in secret, a lot of it was done in secret, and there was this cloak of secrecy about it. It allowed actors, I'm being intentionally reserved and evasive here, but it allowed for not only misunderstanding of the model, but it also allowed for foreign actors outside of this country, foreign to this country, to step in and engage with feminists in ways in which weren't happening with the state. So I won't be evasive about my situation. Other people can tell their story. Israel and Canada would be a perfect example. I know I'm being evasive and reserved, but the way I look at it, very few people listen to my podcast, and the people that listen, I think, will know what I'm speaking about. So in any case, this morning I'm still working on that new brand for my podcast and trying out some new things. And in that light, take a listen, think about it, try to get through the muddle of what I just said, and thank you. This is Debra V. Wilson. I'm in West Yorkshire. Thank you.